Now we look at the spirit and the attitude of philosophical thinking. Okay, so that is, we now have some kind of understanding of what philosophy is and what philosophers do, and how philosophy is different from mere thinking, and how even though everybody is rational as human beings, even everybody as rational beings thinks, but not everybody philosophizes, because not just like what we just explained now. Okay, so the spirit and attitude of philosophical thinking, and this is something we hope that every student will go with, you know, at the end of taking this course. So whether you are in philosophy department or not, it's expected that you should develop this, if you like, philosophical arts, this philosophical attitude and thinking. So now, I talked about having Western in brackets, so this is time for me now to explain them, okay? Let me just put all this. So, why do we have Western in brackets? It's just to make a point that, generally speaking, these are very fundamental spirits of philosophizing, whether it is in Chinese philosophy, whether it is in Western philosophy, whether it is in African philosophy. Anyone who wants to be a philosopher, or who is a philosopher, or who is doing anything that has to do with philosophical thinking, ought to have these spirits. Now, why Western in brackets? Is that in a special way, in the philosophical history of the West, there is the conscious effort for anyone who is said to be a philosopher to, if you like, let me use the word, to be possessed by this spirit in his philosophical enterprise. So right from these pre-Socratic philosophers, you know, and then with Socrates as the so-called Socratic method. So you see that conscious effort to exhibit this spirit. Okay, so we find that for the most part in Western philosophy. Now, this is not to say that in other philosophical traditions, like Chinese philosophy, we are in Taiwan, we have a tradition of Chinese philosophy. Or in African philosophy, this is not to say that, actually we are talking about now in the historical development of this philosophical thinking. We are not saying that this spirit is not there, but it is not as pronounced as we find it in the Western philosophical thinking. Okay? And the reason is simple. The Western philosophical thinking is really very much epistemological and logically based. So the focus is on knowledge in itself for the most part, and the coherency of one thought, and the attitude of making this very, you know, a very open discourse. So that is there. I mean, like in Chinese philosophy, is really the question is how to be a good or social person, how to be a well cultivated person in the society. So the focus is very much, you know, anthropological and then ethical. So the question is how to be a good person. Why in Western tradition, not just being a good person, but for the most part is what is a good person. So you see the point. So that is why you have the Western in brackets. So the spirit of Western philosophical thinking. Of course, there could be many of these spirits, but I have articulated them into these 5. The first one is rational discourse. So one of the spirits of philosophical thinking or philosophizing is a rational discourse. Is to engage your rationality. Is to exert your rational faculty in the interrogation and investigation of things. So it's a rational discourse. It's a rational activity. You know, it's a rational activity. It's a rational discourse. It's not practical. It's not aimed at solving a problem. No. It is aimed at discourse. So that's the first one. It's a rational discourse. So the second one is self-reflection and self-criticism. So a philosopher is a critic, and not just of the critic, not just a critic of the externals. He's also a critic of himself and his own or her own knowledge or claim. So it's self-reflection. So it is very important, and this aspect actually, even in the West, some persons are losing it. Especially when today we talk about professional philosophy of professional philosophers, where philosophy has just become like an academic thing. So you just a job. But for the most part, whether in the West or in other philosophical traditions, philosophers and philosophizing is not just a job. It's a way of life. It's a way of living. So, self-reflection. Asking the serious, who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going to? That is self-criticism. Why ought I do this? That kind of question. He only is asking questions. So that's the third one. Skepticism and questioning. A philosopher or in philosophical thinking, there must be that spirit of always saying, wait a moment. You know? So you don't just accept everything. And this is very important in our digital age, new digital age. In our era of social media, in our era of, proliferation of information. And that is why the students should develop this spirit. To be skeptical. To ask questions, to raise questions. This is very, very fundamental. Not just for the philosopher, but something that philosophers should share. A spirit that people should learn from the philosopher is to be skeptical and to raise questions, to ask questions. So people today are becoming less skeptical in whatever information that comes their way. So this is very important. So the fourth one is search for truth or knowledge. So what the spirit of philosopher is to seek truth, is to seek knowledge, in itself. Okay, in itself. And this is important. And then the fifth one is philosophic consciousness. What that means is that you are conscious of the four points above. So you are conscious you are conscious that you are engaging in rational discourse, you are conscious that you are critical, you are self-reflective. You are conscious that you are skeptical. You are conscious that you are raising questions. You are conscious of truth, of the seeking of truth, of the search for truth. So you are conscious of what you are doing. You are conscious of your search for knowledge. You are conscious of being critical, of being skeptical, of being rational. You are conscious of the need for clarification of concepts and terms, as we said. You are conscious of saying, wait a moment, to think the other way round, to look at it from different perspectives. This is philosophic consciousness, not just taking and swallowing everything that you heard. So this is very important. This is spirit. So you find this for the most part in the history of all philosophical traditions, but in a very special way in the philosophical texts and the philosophical demonstrations of Western philosophers. So these are something that other philosophical traditions, later the contemporary African philosophy, contemporary Chinese philosophy, Asian philosophy, and Latin American philosophy, had to learn from the history of Western philosophy, and then take it back to in understanding and explaining their own reality. So now look at the attitude of philosophical thinking. Again, Western in bracket. I've explained the reason already, the same reason. So we also have 5. There could be many, but these 5 can be a summary of all the attitude of philosophical thinking. The first one is search for knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So this is very important. Why? It explains that Western in bracket. You know, when the pre-Socratic philosophers of Socrates or post-Socratic philosophers of the classical period, when they were seeking to understand what is the Ustav, what is the ultimate substance of things, they were not doing it because they want to build bridges, or they want to build good roads, or because they want to get electricity. They were asking this question just because they want to know. So philosophical thinking, or being a philosopher, or philosophizing, is just to search for knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So the philosophical knowledge is the knowledge we seek for, even when they don't have any practical, even when they don't solve any practical problems. Any knowledge that is aimed at solving any practical problem is not a philosophic knowledge. Philosophic knowledge does not solve practical problems. It is for the sake of knowing that we seek to know. And there is a joy in knowing. There's a joy in acquiring knowledge, you know. So when we do philosophy of life, and we talk about the meaning of life, we are asking and searching to understand, to have a knowledge, to have the knowledge of the meaning of life. Not because we can solve the problem of the question, or because we can now use that knowledge to solve the problem of those who are experiencing absurdity, or who are, no. The search for knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And as I said, it's very much described Western philosophical tradition. That does not mean it's not in other philosophical tradition, but for the most part, it is in the Western philosophical tradition. The second one, scientific research, thinking, and methodology, which is universality, objectivity, and necessity. So what that means is that when we say you know, I always use the example of a water bottle in Chinese called shui hu in the class, because every student in Chinese in our class here, they have their water bottle. I have mine too because we take water. So I usually use the example. So almost all the students on their desk, there is a water bottle, shui hu. So, and the interesting thing, why I always use that as an example, is they are of different shape, of different color, of different sizes. You know, some are made of different, they are made of different materials. Some are plastic, some are steel, some are even ceramic. So different materials, sizes, color, and style of design. But we call each of them water bottle, shui hu. So I always use that example. So why is this shui hu? Why is the water bottle? Why is that the water bottle? They are not the same by appearance. So the reason why we use the same word to signify the same concept. So as we used to say, the cupness for different kind of, there are different cups, different materials. But we all call them cup because of the cupness, you know, using the scholastic way of saying it. They have the same quiddity. They have the same essence. They have the same what makes the water bottle, notwithstanding their accidents, their appearance. So even though they have different color, they have different sizes, but they are all water bottle because they have the same essence of what water bottle, if you like, the function of a water bottle. And this is the same universally everywhere. So whatever you call cup, we can use a different language, but whatever we do with it is the same universally. So that is the point there. So when we think philosophically, we are seeking for the knowledge, for that kind of necessary and universal knowledge of that thing that is irrespective of my emotions or feelings. It is irrespective of my cultural background. So if we say murder is morally bad, when we think about it philosophically, it's irrespective of whether, you know, as you Trofo argued, whether it is my father that murdered somebody or not, it's irrespective of what I feel. So that's seeking that kind of knowledge that is beyond my own, you know, cultural, racial, and if you like, political ideology or whatever, social cultural ideology. That kind of knowledge, the effort to get to arrive that kind of knowledge is what philosophers do and what a philosopher ought to do in the search for knowledge. Okay, so try the best to live above my biases in my search for knowledge. The third one is independent and free thinking. Independent is in the sense that we must be courageous to assert our own positions and views. And that is something very interesting about Western philosophy from the beginning. We say at the beginning, so Anaximander says this, Anaximenes critique it, Heraclitus says this, and then Empedocles even Plato says this, his student Aristotle criticized him. So that's kind of independent thinking. That's courage to assert one position and to be open for others to critique your own position. That is one of the marks of philosophy and philosophical thinking. That's having that attitude to assert your position and to allow others to interrogate your position. So if philosophical thinking is against that bandwagonism, this is how we do it. This is what we consider. You as an independent thinking subject, what is your view? What is your position about what is happening? That is, and then when we say free thinking here, we mean you should be courageous to express your thoughts. And of course, you should respect other people's, free, courageous efforts, and encourage other people to courageously express their own feeling and thoughts. The fourth one, disinterested and unbiased investigation, is linked to the first 2 points we've just mentioned. So we try our best. As human beings, we have the baggages of our culture, of our religion, of our feelings, we have our biases. And so philosophical thinking is to be conscious that I have my bias. I inherited many things. So a philosopher now, a true philosopher, in his philosophical thinking, is conscious of this and is making every effort to live beyond his primordial biases in his articulation of knowledge. That is very important. And it's something also you can learn in this course. The fifth point, ethical discernment and to become a good person. So, and in this fifth point, we find out more, for the most part, in non-Western philosophical tradition. Like in Chinese philosophy, the wise person is not that who knows or has knowledge of many things. No. It's that person who has the knowledge of cultivating his or herself to being a virtuous person. So our philosophical thinking should challenge us to be moral, good persons. And that is very important. And that is why even in the classical and Greek and Hellenistic philosophy, philosophers were, if you like, they are spiritual men, they are spiritual directors. They are those who guide people. Most of them have their disciples. People see them, people want to follow them, people want to be around them because they want to learn. Philosophers were guiding people on how to live their lives and how to be a person. Unfortunately, in the contemporary times, we are losing this aspect of being a philosopher. So it's not just intellectual gymnastism or gymnastic. No. It is, a philosopher should also be a wise man or woman who guides people on how to truly live their lives. And who also give people freedom to choose on how to live their lives. It is very important.